Okay, so I was asked by Lulu to say how kind of I ripped it up, and I think I did the first live stream, so this is kind of a version of that. But so I'm here because I kind of ripped up $1 million lifestyle. Why I did that? About 8 years ago, I built a company where we connected over kind of 100 million people up to the internet in Asia, Africa, the Americas, Eastern Europe. Sold that to an American company for a chunk of change, and I did what I thought was kind of unique, but then you realize is kind of typical for everyone who's just done a successful exit. I did holidays, of course, and then also kind of a bit of mergers and acquisition stuff, bit of kind of skirting on VC land, kind of internet startup investment, startup advisory, which is all kind of great. I also did a kind of a slightly quirky, very crowdsourced, kind of clunky movie about Twitter called Twittermentary, which we did through the States. And then you realize that everyone who's on an exit does a bit of MA, something VC-ish, and something quite quirky, which they think is unique. So it's been completely typical. The one thing that was really missing in all of that was purpose. So I've kind of done that for a couple of years. There's this kind of nagging thing about kind of, I was relatively young, and there are lots of things that need to be fixed, right? And at the time I had my two daughters were 3 and 4. And I started thinking about what can I do that's really going to have an impact on their life through this century. We've got two massive issues. The first one is climate change, and I've kind of got some hobbyist kind of interest in that, but I have no real expertise. The other area is what happens with personal data as we shift into this world where very, very quickly, where the world is literally becoming digitized. So everything around us is becoming digital. And we're kind of in danger of forgetting the human. That's a big problem. So 2 kids growing through this century. And if you look at kind of the way that world works, the more you kind of dive into it, the more you realize there's some fundamentals which are really screwed up. And we're kind of starting to see that now with Chinese social credit systems and Cambridge Analytica coming through and that kind of thing, right? So my kind of decision was, I'm going to dive back into startup land, and lots of friends saying you are completely crazy. And I'm going to basically do something which at least kind of take a shot at making a dent at this kind of big problem, which is kind of how we make the human sustain through a digitized, rapidly evolving digitized world. So the first shot of that, kind of 2013, came back to the UK, set up CitizenMe. CitizenMe is about, the idea is we basically reorganize the internet around us as individuals, humans, right? So we give everyone a copy of their own data. So your data is everywhere. Analog world, you have one apple, I give you an apple, you have my apple. Digital world, you have 2 copies of an apple. And then you go to millions of copies of the apple. So data propagates. There is no single entity. So in theory, you can take a copy of all of your data, technically kind of organize it around you. The data itself is actually pretty boring, and you don't get much from it, but providing you with insights around that. If we can do that in a way at scale, we can start to change the mechanics of the internet, which is a big, audacious, hairy goal, which is the kind of thing you do when you're just on an exit and you think you can conquer anything, foolishly. So the first version of the application, we did version 1 just post Snowden. So Snowden was all about lockdown. Any journalist you talk to, speaking to lots of journalists and tech security people, people in law, civic society, etc., it's all about locking down data, kind of like massive reaction to kind of like our data, sudden realization that our data is basically going to places we don't necessarily want it to be. So first version of the application was giving you a very simple dashboard, scan your phone for the apps on your phone, tell you which of those apps are going to do good and bad things with your data. So Facebook, big red spot on your dashboard, and you can tap on Facebook, go into the settings on Facebook, lock down your photos, et cetera, and kind of like make Facebook slightly more benign for you, right? We also had a couple of other things. We had the ability to change your profile around the internet, so I can put a Christmas hat on in December on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook at the same time from one place, kind of utility life dash thing. And the third thing we did, we had a partnership with the University of Cambridge, where their psychometric team were doing some really interesting stuff with Facebook likes, which you now know more about, and kind of giving people kind of looking at personality profile based on Facebook behavior, which we thought was really interesting. So we kind of put that in the app as well, so you can kind of see a bit of a digital mirror. This is how you might be perceived based on your data. So we launched that, 14,000 downloads in a couple of weeks, kind of great TV coverage, press, everything else. Kind of, I was just saying, we got a cease and desist from CitizenM because we screwed up the hotels, because we screwed up their SEO. And then we started looking at the data. And we realized that about 5 or 10% of people really gave a shit, really kind of went in, voted on good and bad terms of service, and kind of really, really active. But the rest of the people who came in, and actually a lot of the really activistic people, what they really wanted to see was how they look on Facebook. And then you see it kind of like despite all the research we've done and talking to lots of eminent people about kind of amazing stuff and kind of like what's happening in the industry, when you look at real behavior, even though we all say we're worried about data, anything beyond an ad block where I switch it on, install it, and just leave it and assume it's doing its job is too much work. So we then did one of those, I hate the word because I kind of think people doing, I'm going to say the word pivot. We did a pivot. Which I kind of think of, people doing a gardening app and they end up doing something for rocket science or something. It's like, that's kind of pivot. And we're still on mission, but we realized we need to change the outcomes. So we did a lot of research, and we basically built out a platform. The critical thing was basically everyone wants to see what their data actually says about themselves. Second thing is there is this multi-trillion-dollar industry, which is the internet, which we all participate in without knowing it. And if we can enable you to tap into that, that drives massive pickup. So we've now built out an application launched last year, two-sided exchange where you can get lots of deep insight about yourself from your data in an application, very simple to use. We now have about 250,000 people on that, growing at 3 to 4% per week. So that's really kind of taking off. And then on the other side, organizations can come in and you can anonymously choose to share data with those organizations. And that can be for market research, customer insights, but also for things like medical health. And one of the nice outcomes from that for me is we're working with the University of Manchester, really serious stuff, post-clinical diagnosis psychosis interactions, interventions, where we can look at background data and someone who's in post-diagnosis treatment, their app can basically ping their clinician to tell them they're about to go through an episode based on background data, that kind of thing. So really kind of starting to kind of enable kind of us to kind of surface the benefits of that data. So we're kind of really early days, just to finish. 250,000, our target is tens of millions of people. It's taken us a few years to kind of get there, but we're now kind of solidly up on the...
Thank you.